Ay, ay, ay.
I've had 2 miscarriages.
I've had 10 miscarriages.
I've had 3 miscarriages.
I've had 6 miscarriages.
And I've had 2.
I've had 2.
I've had 2 as well.
I've had 1 miscarriage in my life.
I've had 3 miscarriages so far.
1.
We've had 1 miscarriage, yeah. Which was, hard enough.
I was around 7 to 8 weeks for both of them.
I was 5 weeks pregnant when we found out we were losing the baby.
My first miscarriage was very early. It was at 9 or 10 weeks. And my second miscarriage was at 13 weeks.
I was 9 weeks along with the first one and 12 weeks with the second one.
So the furthest along I got was 17 weeks, was my latest miscarriage. And then I had about 4 miscarriages around the end of the first trimester, so around the 12-week mark that I found out about when I went for my scan. And then the rest of them were earlier miscarriages under the 12-week mark.
My first one, I was 10 weeks along, and the others were, around that 7-8 week mark.
My first one I was 10 weeks and my second one I was somewhere between 8 and 10 weeks.
My first miscarriage, I was 6 weeks along. My second miscarriage, I was 12 weeks along. And my third miscarriage, I was about 24 hours along.
The first one was 8 weeks. The second one was around 6 weeks. And the third one was around 6 weeks as well.
My first experience with miscarriage, it came out straight of the blue. I woke up with severe cramping and bleeding and ran to the bathroom and immediately started contracting, and my body just started expelling the pregnancy.
With my first one, I didn't know I was having a miscarriage. I just, I had one teeny tiny incy-wincy drop of blood, and I just thought, probably nothing.
I found out with the 9-week miscarriage, the first one, at the obstetrician's office with an early scan, just basically showing that it was what we call a blighted ovum, which is when there's just a sac and no baby. And then with the second one, I actually found out at our 12-week scan, the dating scan, that the baby had stopped growing and there was no heartbeat.
The second miscarriage I had, I went for an ultrasound. Everything seemed to be growing normally. They just couldn't find a heartbeat at 6 weeks, so they told me to just wait a little bit longer. My dates could have been wrong. And subsequently on my second ultrasound, they couldn't find the heartbeat.
Was 10 weeks pregnant, and I'd had, again, a scan a few weeks earlier to make sure everything was okay, because I was more nervous in this pregnancy, and I saw a heartbeat. Everything was measuring perfectly and fine. But on holiday, I started to spot, and I started to bleed, and I didn't tell anyone, not even my husband, because I didn't want to spoil anybody's holiday. So I dealt with that as the bleeding got heavier and heavier, and I started to cramp by myself for 2 days until I came home. And then I went for a scan, and then I heard those words again. I'm sorry, there is no heartbeat. And that pregnancy I passed naturally at home, in the shower, alone, at 3 a.m, with nowhere to turn except for Google to work out if it was normal what I was experiencing or whether I needed a trip to the hospital.
My third miscarriage was almost like an immediate miscarriage again, where I got the positive pregnancy test went to work that day and started bleeding straight away while I was at work, literally straight after I had told my husband that I was pregnant. So.
The first miscarriage was actually the first time I got pregnant through an IUI cycle, and I'd been having spotting for about 10 days, and I agitated the nurses and the doctors for a scan. And the second miscarriage, there were some other signs that were being picked up in my monitoring that gave an indication that things weren't going very well.
I didn't. So I had 2 children pretty easily. So the first late miscarriage took me by surprise. And that was a missed miscarriage.
No, I didn't know that there were different types of miscarriages.
I think the first one was a very straight down the line. The embryo wasn't genetically sound and just didn't continue to grow and develop as it should have. And the second one, there was actually a proper genetic abnormality which led to the baby not being viable.
From all I know is I had a normal miscarriage, or maybe an early term miscarriage. We got a call a week later after we found out we were pregnant that my HCG levels had dropped and to expect to start bleeding within the next few days.
So for me, it was sonographers who did a really poor job of telling me the news. By the time I think I had my 4th missed miscarriage diagnosed by ultrasound, I had gone in saying, this has happened to me 3 times already. And when she said to me, the baby has no heartbeat, I just remember saying, well, of course it doesn't. So it was pretty tough.
I went to the emergency room and I was told to go get an ultrasound. Went and got an ultrasound and they couldn't find anything in there. Basically, my body had just expelled it pretty quickly. I think they found a little bit of pregnancy tissue. And I was told to take a Panadol and just go home and wait for it to end, basically.
I mean, definitely the first one that stands out the most as that, I'm very sorry your baby has no heartbeat.
It was just devastating, I think.
I think you'll never hear a silence like it.
Just completely unexpected and flawed. And I think you condition yourself then.
Yeah.
That, when you go for the subsequent ones, I was expecting it almost. So it was just, I don't know, somehow a bit different, but yeah.
Support was amazing, but then once you walk out of the hospital or out of the clinic, you're quite lost.
Yes, my doctor was amazing. He offered me his own personal support and gave me connections to details that he had at that point. Pink elephants didn't exist, sadly. So that was, I think, SANS probably, but I relied on family and friends.
The second time round I found a GP who had a much better model of care and she was far more supportive. She had a level of understanding and she offered more emotional support, and that made the experience easier. She validated that my loss mattered and that it was okay to be absolutely devastated and that was normal.
Definitely for me, the GP was the head of the clinic, and he was so sad that he had to be the one to tell me about the miscarriage. And it was funny because I felt like he needed to give me something, or like I walked away with nothing, no paperwork, nothing to refer to. And I feel like that's something where Pink Elephants could have been really helpful.
None of my questions were answered. I was really dismissed. And I just felt like a number in a system, and I felt as though my living, breathing child to me was just nothing to them.
I felt really like trapped in this grief. I felt like I was trying to speak to people and tell them that I really wasn't coping. But I think the shock was so big that it was really, really tough. And I have an amazing supportive husband and family and everyone around me, and everybody wanted to help and everyone wanted to be supportive. But it's really hard to vocalize what you're going through to someone that hasn't gone through it.
I was quite lucky to have the support that I did because I had close friends that had been through this sort of thing before. So I was very open about it and was able to talk to my family and friends about it.
For me, my family are overseas, so I probably felt further isolated from them because I couldn't just have my mum give me a hug. And then even with friends, I struggled just because people would talk about it. They're like, I've had one too, and they'd whisper. And for me, who is a talker and is quite outgoing, that made me angry because it made me feel like we were hiding this thing that had happened to us. And I didn't understand why I should hide something because I didn't feel guilty about my losses. I felt grief. I was sad I'd lost my babies that I'd planned and wanted.
I felt I could talk to my own mother. I had no idea that she actually had a miscarriage until I probed her a little bit more recently, but generally miscarriage wasn't in my family. No one else had experienced it. My husband's side of the family, I really struggled talking with them about it because I felt such an odd, like, primal thing, but like I felt like I failed their son. So I struggled speaking with most of my family except probably just my mother. And, you know, family like to come up with solutions for you. Friends like to come up with solutions, you know, like, oh, it'll happen again quickly, or just fix this, or just do this, or why don't you try get tested for this? And you know, it's only coming out the other side that I realised they were all just trying their best to support me. So.
It was really strange for us because if you think about it, we had a week where we felt we were pregnant. So we kept thinking, oh, it was so early, so we shouldn't obviously get excited. But given it was my first pregnancy, I was in. I was like, I'm pregnant. This is gonna happen. So when we found out that suddenly it wasn't gonna happen, it was a really big shock.
Yeah, it's very complicated. I found it like the first loss kind of went through the loss, and my husband, we were really close and everything went, you know, kind of really, we got through it and we were like, we're going to try again. And then after the second loss, I think the shock of the miscarriage, and I actually had an emergency D&C and there was quite a lot of trauma, and it was very traumatic for both of us. And we really struggled to get through that because my husband, I know now that he wasn't coping with seeing me the way that I was, and he could do absolutely nothing to fix it. And I found that also talking with so many women through the support program that like men want to fix this, like, so men are fixers, they want to fix things, they want to make sure that, you know, everyone's okay and they can fix things. This is probably one of the only things they can't fix. And I find that that's probably, for me, the thing. My husband couldn't do anything for me. And we got to a point where I was 6 months down the line and I was still grieving, and he just didn't know what to do anymore. And that actually made it really, really hard for us to communicate. And we talk about that now when we look back at it. And that's what he says to me. He said, I just did not know how to do, like, what I needed to do for you because I couldn't fix the situation.
Yeah, on my husband, he was absolutely devastated as well. He wasn't at the scan with me, but he came straight home and he had the next day off work as well, and he was distraught, absolutely distraught. But he was great. He was so supportive and so wonderful, and it was nice that we cried together and grieved together. So, you know, I didn't feel that I was alone in my marriage, having lost a baby together. You know, I think probably as we went on and got further down the track with more losses, it wasn't it was just a bit different. I think, he was just sad, but obviously went to work and kind of continued on as normal because kind of had to, really. But no, look, he was great. Definitely great and supportive. Yeah.
I definitely think that men and women cope with pregnancy loss differently.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely. I think men are more known as translational grievers, which means that they cope by doing and fixing and boxing things away and trying the best to make you okay, rather than actually processing the emotion of the loss. That's fair to say.
The woman is physically going through something, and the man is emotionally going through something and trying to be supportive, but he'll never know what that physically feels like. So that fundamentally there's always going to be a different reaction and coping mechanism to that.
Because he's not feeling what I'm feeling on the inside. He's not going through, the cramping, the bleeding, the just everything, all the hormonal changes. So he's just seeing everything on the outside, and of course he's upset emotionally and mentally, but for him to go through it physically, he can't.
My husband and I both dealt with the miscarriage in different ways. I really wore my heart on my sleeve with him. I really told him everything I was physically feeling, emotionally feeling, psychologically feeling, whereas my husband seemed to shut down and go on autopilot mode of being the protector, the husband, the rock, the pick yourself back up kind of thing. And it took a lot of questioning on my end for him to finally sort of share a little bit more about how he was feeling. And even to this day, I think he still struggles with it. The biggest thing with miscarriage is the self-blame.
I got quite defensive at times, and so we would end up in quite a few arguments during that period when we were trying to keep calm. So I think there was a period later on where I really looked at that. It wasn't straight away. It was quite a little while afterwards, but I was starting to feel a bit of that, feel a bit of guilt, and felt like I was partly to blame for that by not keeping Stace calm and keeping the relationship settled during that period of time. So it definitely did creep in a little bit.
Which breaks me. I need to say again, everyone's filming us, we never have that power. I will just continue to repeat this.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
No, I didn't blame myself. No, I've got a good kind of belief system and some really good foundations.
You just feel so responsible for your body and what it's doing, and you just feel like such a failure, and that's really difficult as a woman, and that's a really hard cross to bear.
I really wanted to know why. It wasn't that I blamed me or anything that I'd done necessarily, but I just needed to know why, because if I knew why, I could rationalise it. If I knew why, I could fix it. I could do something. Tell me why and what I need to do to make sure it doesn't happen again.
No, it was really weird. I never blamed myself. I think I dissociated from everything that was going on. I think I had to.
Again, the rational part of me knows fully that it wasn't, but there'll still always be a little part of me with self-doubt. I don't think that'll ever go.
Yeah, I've definitely come to realise that it wasn't my fault, and I've definitely grown more accustomed to surrendering to whatever the universe has in store.
Knowing now what I do, I know that it was nothing that I had done, nothing I'd eaten, not my stress. I know now that sometimes just an embryo doesn't have enough energy, or your lining wasn't quite right, or there was something wrong, and it's not your fault.
There's always that what if, but I mean 9 out of 10 times I know it's not my fault, and I know that I shouldn't be beating myself up, blaming myself, you know, for these losses.
I know now that it wasn't my fault, but it doesn't take away the fact that there's still that sense of loss, and I feel comforted in knowing that by sharing my story, I'm speaking with other women who have felt similar things, and that certainly makes me feel stronger, and it certainly helps me knowing that if someone else was feeling the same way, they would hopefully gain a bit of strength from me sharing my experience and realizing that it's not their fault either.
Oh, this is yeah, it's a good question.
I think like I was just trying to get through the days. I was literally just, you know, kind of getting through the days. I think after the second miscarriage, I think I ended up with complicated grief. I was still 6 months after really struggling, and I actually went and saw a psychologist, which I think was very, very helpful.
So the way that I dealt with it was I said, I'm going to become a counsellor, and I'm going to work in this space and be able to help people who are losing babies. So even though I didn't have the capacity to look inside and see what I need, I guess what I did was went to study counselling.
As soon as my husband and I knew that we were going to miscarry, and we were told obviously a few days before it was going to happen, we booked a little country place down south together with our dogs, and we spent a few days there just to go through it together. I think it was really important to get away from everything and really acknowledge what was happening and not pretend it wasn't happening, and then just really be there for each other.
I would normally kind of go hide under my rock for a few days, and I needed to just be with me, my husband, just not talk to anyone, not see anyone, you know, I didn't do any particular self-care things other than just protect myself while I kind of processed what was happening.
I didn't do anything. I just kept going. I allowed myself to cry. I really allowed myself to cry, but a lot of that was done in the shower or when no one was really looking, or with my husband when he was just about to fall asleep in bed and I was still wide awake and my mind was racing. I allowed myself to cry and grieve, but I didn't really nurture myself or anything like that. I think that only came after the fact.
I told everyone, and I didn't care how uncomfortable it made them feel, because it made a little part of me feel better by telling them and sharing it. It almost kind of relieved the burden of it a little bit.
For me, it was talking to friends. I like to journal and draw and do a few things like that, just to remember the babies that I've lost.
It's funny, before I ever had a miscarriage, I didn't really ever think about this, and didn't think about when my friends used to talk about that they'd had a miscarriage. It felt really like, oh yes, so it just didn't work. Now being in the situation where I have had one and women aren't talking about it, I really feel like it's got to do with feeling like you've failed in some way, that you couldn't quite do it, maybe something's wrong with you. For me, I think personally that's why I wouldn't go telling people.
It's something that I've thought about quite a lot, why society has trouble discussing this really important issue. I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that couples and women don't talk about the fact that they're pregnant in the early stages. So then turning around and trying to explain that they've lost a pregnancy that they may not even have announced is obviously just something that's not going to happen.
Because it's disenfranchised. Nobody wants to talk about dead babies or infertility, and it's a really uncomfortable place for people, and it's unbelievable how many people I speak to who have had miscarriages, and the one thing that everybody turns around and says is, I never knew. I did not know that it could have an impact like this on people. I wish I did. And I often find that people have regrets about the way they speak or didn't speak to people who were having miscarriages.
You go. Sorry. I don't know. I think it's just I think it's society, our reaction to grief. I feel like we just don't cope with grief very well.
We innately as women have this idea that we should bear children, and there should be no complications, and it should look like those lovely Huggies ads. You know, there's like a lovely bump, and you go to have the baby and there's no the baby just comes out. There's this idea, and if you can't provide that idea, you innately blame yourself, and that just perpetuates this cycle of failure. And I think women struggle to talk about it.
Appearing on video talking about miscarriage. Do I have triggers?
I don't have any triggers anymore. I used to have triggers, and the one trigger that was for me was getting my periods every month.
I gave blood last week, and on the form was when was your last pregnancy, and did you have a miscarriage? And I teared up about that, and it's been a few years, and yeah, I think it can catch you by surprise some days.
I think possibly other people going through the situation. I desperately want to step in and offer support and emotional hugs and concern for people who are in this circumstance, but I do find that it brings my own experiences back to mind.
I think if anyone's been through a miscarriage or a loss of any type, this like everything is a trigger. Every pregnant woman, every pram, every baby crying, every pregnancy announcement on social media, anything like that for me is a trigger.
My trigger is still, I get very often like, oh, have you only got the one? And that's the one that gets me every single time.
Yes.
So many. So don't tearing up. So many. Oh, it's really opened up so many beautiful friendships and relationships, and yeah, it really has. Hey, yeah.
I've made quite a number of new friends through this whole journey.
I've made plenty of relationships and connections with other women. I think women in general are now starting to have more of a voice in talking about miscarriage, and I think platforms like the Pink Elephant Support Network and other communities out there are allowing women a voice to share their experiences, and I think it's magical.
Oh, absolutely. I've made so many connections with other mothers who have experienced loss.
I think some of the crappiest things people have said is, well, at least you know you can get pregnant, or, oh, well, at least it happened really early so you didn't get too attached. They're probably some of the worst ones.
So the most unhelpful thing was, don't worry, you'll have a baby.
You can try again. I knew I was going to try again. That was a given. I wanted a child. But at that point in time, I needed to really sit with the loss.
It's okay, you're still young. You can have another child soon. That was probably a pretty crappy response.
Your losses, they're only early on, so, you know, that's pretty lucky.
Yeah, and at least you've got one healthy child.
Yeah.
Also, I was only early. That's the other one.
You can try again, you're young, you've still got time.
It's not your fault, a little more. I heard a lot of "I'm sorry," because I think people do struggle with sort of trying to sympathise with you when you're going through this. But I would have liked to have heard a little bit more, "It's not your fault," because "I'm sorry" didn't cut it when I was at home blaming myself.
I'm sorry. What can I do to help you? Let me know if you need anything. I'm here to support you.
I don't think I really wanted to hear anything. I think I just wanted someone to listen to me when I was just crying.
I think if you don't know what to say to somebody that's had a miscarriage, maybe don't say anything at all and just sort of be there, hug them, support them, make them feel like it counts and it mattered.
It's such a tough one to help people to understand what to say. We're all different and all of our journeys are different. I think you really just need to be with your friend and try and be in the moment with them and give them support perhaps in other ways other than words.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
That's all I needed to hear.
And I think that's all you need to say when when someone tells you about their loss. To tell them that you're sorry. That's it. You don't need to say anything else.
The Pink Elephant group has supported me by creating this platform that I can speak to other women about what I've been through, and also being able to read a lot of content and talk to people about stuff that no one's talking about. And I'm getting to a point where I'm not feeling uncomfortable about sharing that content on my own channel because I think it's so important to get that message out there.
I didn't come upon them for support in my own miscarriage. I found them, or they found me, through work. But I can absolutely say that they've helped me in a myriad of ways with dealing with my own situation, and they've helped me amplify what's an incredibly important conversation through my work and their work.
I actively researched online. I was looking for support networks, particularly early miscarriage loss, which I think gets dismissed quite a lot. And I came across the Pink Elephant Support Network, and I loved chatting to the women on there. I loved their ideas about acknowledging their losses, and it opened my eyes to this incredible community of women that are really changing the conversation for everyone.
Honestly, it's just been the final part in my recovery, and it's just been something that has been so rewarding for me personally, and I just really feel like it is the positive thing that has come out of the negative that was the miscarriage.
To stop and allow your psyche to catch up with what's going on for your body physically, to reach out, to seek support from others who have experienced something similar. I think there's so much power in sitting in a space with somebody who does get it.
One of the better ways to help each other cope is really communication. You really need to be, and I think this particularly goes for blokes. I know I'm not the best communicator, and I'm sure there's a lot of other men out there who are like, emotions, feelings, what are they? You know, that's
I think you feel them. I think it's harder to say them.
Yeah, but sometimes I think it's hard for guys to figure out what the emotion actually is. You know, sometimes Stace has asked me what you're feeling. I'm like, upset. She's like, that's not an emotion.
My advice would be reach out to communities and to other women you know who have gone through this. There's so much power and there's so much nurture in numbers and speaking with other women.
Make sure that you're sitting and feeling what you're feeling, that you're not trying to move through it too fast or pretend that it's not happening. You are well entitled to be feeling grief.
I just tell them that I'm so sorry that they're going through this loss, through the grief, through the pain. There are networks. There are people that will definitely be there and we'll loan their shoulder for them to cry on.
Reach out to people, and whether it's a friend or a family member or your GP, just talk to someone, reach out to Pink Elephants.
Oh no, hopefully you got what you needed.
Yeah.
Great. That's a wrap.
Great.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well done.